My name is Elizabeth Halloran. I'm 28 years old. Last Thanksgiving, my sister grabbed my plate and dumped it into the trash right in front of me. A woman pregnant out of wedlock doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as this family. You're nothing but a disgrace. My mother looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Get out. We're done with your shame." My father opened the front door like I was a stranger. My brother laughed under his breath. I was 22 weeks pregnant. I looked at every single one of them and said one word: understood. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply walked out. What they didn't know was that the man they had spent 10 months secretly trying to force onto my sister already belonged to me. And by the next morning, they were about to find out exactly what that meant. If you've ever been thrown out of your own family's holiday because they decided your body was a headline, stay with me. You are not the only one, and you are not the one who should have left the room. I want to start by telling you what my hands looked like when I finally sat down in my car on my parents' driveway. They were steady. 6 years of ICU shifts at Good Samaritan Hospital in Cincinnati will do that to a person. When you have held pressure on a stranger's femoral artery at 3 in the morning while a resident calls the OR, your hands stop shaking on command. You carry other people's worst days home in your bones, and you learn to fold them up before you unlock your own front door. I've worked the trauma floor since I was 22. I went straight from the University of Cincinnati into the burn and shock unit because my supervisor said I had, in her words, cool hands and colder judgment. She still calls me Halloran Cool Hands, and after 6 years I've stopped correcting her. It's not really my name anymore, but she earned the right to use it. I live in a 2-bedroom townhouse in Hyde Park. My husband and I bought it together in June of 2024, 6 months before we made the marriage part official. I grew up in Northside, 10 miles and one entire economic bracket away. Northside is Halloran country. My father, Sean, has owned an auto body shop on Hamilton Avenue since 1988. My mother, Bridget, has been the parish secretary at St. Aloysius for 22 years. My brother Cormac is a Cincinnati police officer working the River West District. My sister Vivian works the front desk at a dentist's office in Hyde Park, which she thinks is a coincidence. My grandmother Fiona is 88 and lives at Mercy Manor. She raised most of us, which is a fact my mother has spent decades trying to rewrite. In our house growing up, being liked and being useful were the same word. If you weren't one, you weren't the other. Vivian was liked. Cormac was useful. I was the one my mother introduced as her nurse daughter, which sounded like praise until you noticed she never said my name. Every family has a currency. In ours, it was reputation. My mother traded in it the way other people trade in stocks. She knew which family in the parish had just paid for a new kitchen. She knew which teenager had been picked up in Norwood on a bad Friday night. She knew which husband had been seen at the East Walnut Hills Tavern with someone who was not his wife. She held those pieces of information the way my father held wrenches in his shop, and she used them just as precisely. If you wanted to know who to sit next to at the Easter brunch, you asked Bridget Halloran. If you did not want your business to be a topic of conversation, you did not cross her. I crossed her when I was 17 by getting a full scholarship to a nursing program she had not chosen. She had wanted me to marry a boy from the parish named Patrick Fitzpatrick and go to community college part-time. I applied to UC in November of my senior year without telling her. When the letter came in March, I opened it in my bedroom with my door locked. I brought it downstairs at dinner, and I put it on the table between the mashed potatoes and the green beans, and my mother read it once. She said, "Well, I hope you don't expect me to help you pay for that." I did not. I did not expect anything from her ever again. That was the beginning of what I now understand was a long, quiet civil war. She did not stop. She got quieter and better. She would call me at 10 at night my second year in the program and ask, in a voice full of concern, whether I was still keeping up with my faith. She would tell my aunts at Christmas that I was so focused on my career, she barely saw me anymore, as if I lived across the ocean and not across the river. She would introduce me at parish events by profession, never by first name, so the person shaking my hand would say, "Oh, you must be so proud." And my mother would say, in a voice tuned exactly 1 degree flat, "We are trying to be." I learned early that my mother's approval was a rental property, and I could never afford the rent. Cormac was different. Cormac was cheap. He gave her what she wanted for free. He went to the academy at 22, married a girlfriend she liked at 24, moved back into the neighborhood at 26. He was, in her language, a good son. What that meant in practice was that Cormac had never disagreed with her out loud in his adult life. It cost him something. I could see it in the way he drank. I could see it in the way he stopped being funny somewhere, around the age of 28. He had traded his own voice for her approval, and he could not admit that even to himself. So he watched me have both my voice and my life, and he found ways, small ones at first, to remind me that I would pay for it. Vivian was born into the role I had failed at. She was the pretty one. She was the compliant one. She was the one who let my mother pick her clothes until she was 19, and who, when she finally started buying her own, bought exactly what my mother would have bought. Vivian was not stupid. I want to say that carefully. She was under an amount of pressure I had walked out from under at 17. She had grown up watching what happened to the daughter who said no, and she had made the completely rational decision, at some point in middle school, to never be that daughter. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I finished a 12-hour night shift by walking a 19-year-old motorcyclist through the first 4 hours after his second surgery. By the time the sun came up over the Ohio River, the boy on my table had a name and a mother in the waiting room. I signed out at 7, drove home with a paper cup of hospital coffee I forgot to drink, and got a text from my mother that read, "Come at 3 on Thursday. Wear something appropriate. Don't bring anyone." That last sentence was the part I noticed. I had been dating someone she knew about for well over a year. She called him, when she was being polite, the fireman. When she was not being polite, she didn't call him anything at all. I had never given her his last name. That was on purpose, because 10 months earlier, in a courtroom in downtown Cincinnati, I had married Captain Nolan Fitzgerald of Cincinnati Fire Station 19. 2 witnesses signed the paperwork. His best friend, Lieutenant Declan O'Rourke, and his mother, Maeve Fitzgerald, formerly the office manager for the Archbishop of Cincinnati. Maeve took her wedding ring off her own finger that morning and put it on mine. She said, "Patrick gave me this in 1987. It's yours now. Don't wear it in front of anyone who doesn't deserve to know." I had not worn it in front of my mother, not because I was ashamed, because I had learned very early that anything I let my mother see, she would eventually use. I met Nolan on the worst night of both our lives. It was August of 2023. There was a fire in an old 3-story walk-up in Over the Rhine. The building was full of families who had been priced out of everywhere else in the city. 4 children came into our ER at Good Samaritan, all of them small enough for the pediatric bays. Their mothers came in on a different rig. Nolan came in with the mothers, still in his turnout coat, his face streaked with soot, standing at the end of the hallway like the wall was doing him a favor by holding him up. I brought him a bottle of water because he was in the way of a supply cart, and I did not want him to fall down where the families could see him. He took the bottle without saying thank you, and he did not drink it. He held it for the next 2 hours. When he finally walked out, he took the bottle with him. 6 months later, he showed up at a hospital fundraiser and found me at the coffee station specifically to give me back the empty plastic cup. He said, "I've been carrying this around like an idiot. I didn't know your name and I didn't want to throw it out. I have very few boundaries in my life about coffee cups, but that one was uncrossable. So I laughed, which was not something I had done in front of a stranger in a long time, and I gave him my name. He gave me his after. We spent almost a year not telling anyone. He was still the fire captain on the front page of the Cincinnati Enquirer for carrying two of those children down a stairwell that collapsed under him. I was still the nurse whose mother introduced me as her daughter, the nurse. Neither of us wanted our marriage in a caption. The dating part of that year is the part I remember most clearly, and it's the part I have the least evidence of. We did not post pictures. He was on shift for 48 hours at a time, and I was on shift for 12 at a time, and we found each other around the edges. We met for breakfast at a diner in Northside. I knew my mother would never enter because it was owned by a family whose mother she had a feud with in 2004 that everyone but Bridget had forgotten about. We took his dog, a rescued shepherd mix named Beckett, on long walks in Alt Park, where the trees were tall enough to hide any face. He came to my apartment on the nights he was off. He learned that I put my keys in the same bowl every day, and that I could not eat before a night shift, and that I cried sometimes when I got home from losing a young patient, and he did not try to fix it. He put a blanket over my legs and made me a piece of toast and sat there while I sat there, and that was enough. He asked me to marry him in November of 2024, in the parking lot of the 24-hour diner in Newport, over a milkshake and a plate of eggs at 4 in the morning. He did not have a ring. He said he had wanted to buy one but had realized on the way over that his mother would want to be involved in that part, and he did not want to spend the whole conversation talking about his mother. He said, "I want to be married to you before Christmas. I don't want a wedding. I don't want a photographer. I want to know that if I go into a fire and don't come out, they will call you first." I said yes over the milkshake. I did not cry. He did. Then, in March of 2025, we lost firefighter Colin Doyle. He was 26 years old. A warehouse in Camp Washington came down on him. Nolan had trained him. Colin had a fiancée named Chauvin Riley, who folded his uniform on their kitchen table because she wasn't ready to fold a flag. Nolan came home from the funeral, sat on our stairs still in his dress uniform, and said, "I can't stand next to you in a church while she's still folding his flag." I said, "All right." That is how the wedding stayed at the courthouse. I say all of that because I want you to understand what my family did not know when they sat down at that Thanksgiving table. They did not know I had a husband. They did not know I had a mother-in-law who could have run half the parishes in this city if she'd wanted to. They did not know I had a name written in the county records that was not Halloran. But they knew something was up. Because for the last 10 months, my mother had been trying to hand my sister to a man she thought was still single. She just hadn't known which man. The first time I realized my mother had picked a target for Vivian, it was mid-June of 2025. There was a fundraiser at Station 19 for the Widows Fund. My mother, who had never before shown any interest in fire department politics, came with Vivian in a Kelly green dress from Nordstrom Kenwood. She stood a half step behind my sister the entire evening, the way she used to stand behind me at CYO dances when I was in 8th grade, arranging me into an angle she preferred. I was there because Nolan was captain of Station 19. I was not in a green dress. I was in navy, standing near the coffee table because I was 15 weeks pregnant and morning sickness had turned into afternoon sickness, and I needed to be near a trash can I could reach without a scene. I watched my mother watch Nolan cross the room and put a hand under my elbow. It was a small thing. He does it in crowds because he is always half a shift away from thinking about the last person he lost. But my mother's eyes tracked that hand from his sleeve to my arm to the space between our bodies, and I watched her make a face I have known my entire life. It is the face she makes when a plan changes, I found out later from Vivian that my mother went home that night and pulled up Nolan's Facebook page on the family laptop. There were pictures of us at a hospital gala in February of 2024. Not many. Enough. My mother looked at those pictures for about 6 minutes, closed the laptop, and told Vivian at breakfast the next morning, "You know, honey, sometimes the right man is with the wrong woman. It's a mother's job to correct that." Vivian repeated that sentence to me in a Grader's on Hyde Park Square in December, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. That summer, 4 separate times, Vivian happened to run into Nolan. Twice at 11 o'clock Mass at St. Aloysius, where he goes on the Sundays he's not on shift because his mother sings in the choir. Once at another fundraiser, this one hosted by my mother in the parish hall. And once, disturbingly, at my father's auto body shop, where Nolan brought in his truck for an alignment and my father did not charge him. I only learned about the fourth one because Nolan came home that evening, kissed me on the top of my head and said, "Your father runs an honest shop. I owe him $180. He wouldn't take it." I put my fork down. My father charges everyone. My father charges his own brothers. Nolan looked at me. He said, "Your sister was there." That was the first time I let myself say it out loud. "My mother is trying to give my husband to my sister," he said, without heat. "I know. I've known since June." I said, "Why haven't you said anything?" He said, "Because your mother is going to hang herself with this rope, and I don't want to be the one holding the other end when she does. I told you my hands don't shake in a code." That night, I sat at my kitchen table and my hands did not shake either. I made a list. I wrote down every time Vivian had been placed near Nolan. I wrote down every time my mother had asked me, in that light voice, what his last name was again. I wrote down every time my brother had made a comment about how nice it would be if Vivian, quote, finally settled down with a good Catholic man. Then I put the list in a folder on my phone I keep called Receipts. I have kept that folder for 6 years, ever since my brother lied about something I had said to a boyfriend I had at the time. I have never needed to open it in an argument. I just like knowing where things are. The truth was that I had already been keeping the list in my head for months. Writing it down did not make me feel better. It made me feel colder, which is what I needed. When you have been the daughter of a woman like my mother for 28 years, warmth is a liability. You learn to notice the small departures from the script and to save them like a nurse saves lab values. Not because any single one is proof of anything, but because a trend line is a trend line, and it does not lie the way a person can. I told Nolan about the list that Sunday night. He read it in silence at our kitchen table. He handed the phone back to me and he said, "You have a very good chart." Then he stood up and he made a pot of decaf coffee and he sat back down. He said, "Your Uncle Rowan is going to hate her. That's going to be a problem for her. Not for us." He said, "When it comes, you don't have to speak. Let me and my mother and the paperwork speak for you. You've been doing enough talking for 28 years. I have thought about that sentence about 100 times since. It is the sentence I would put on a card if I ever needed to write one to a stranger who was in the middle of the same kind of long, quiet civil war that I had grown up inside of. In October, at a parish appreciation dinner for first responders, my mother was formally introduced to Nolan's uncle, Judge Rowan Fitzgerald. She introduced herself as the mother of 3 daughters, all of them raised the way our mothers taught us, all of them at 11 o'clock Mass. Judge Rowan nodded, mentioned his nephew Nolan, and my mother tried very hard to look like the name meant nothing to her. Judge Rowan called my husband from the parking lot afterward. He said, "Nolan, Bridget Halloran just introduced herself to me. What kind of game is she playing?" That was the phone call that turned my mother's scheme from a delusion into a documented thing. That was also the phone call that my mother didn't know had happened. She thought she had been polite and unnoticed. She had, in her own head, moved a piece on a board no one else could see. The board was already on fire, and she couldn't smell it yet. On the last day of October, my brother Cormac came over to my townhouse to, in his words, borrow a drill. Cormac has never borrowed a tool in his life. He has an entire garage. He and my father have three of everything. He arrived at 7:15 in the evening. I had come home from an OB appointment 2 hours earlier with a folder of ultrasound photos and a printed appointment schedule sitting on the marble countertop of the master bathroom because I had walked upstairs to take a shower and never came back down for it. Cormac asked to use my bathroom because the guest one, he claimed, was out of toilet paper. He was upstairs for maybe 90 seconds. When he came back down, he made a joke about how nice my baseboards were, which is not a thing Cormac has ever said. And then he took the drill out of my utility closet and left. I did not think about it again for 3 months. I should have. We are supposed to be at 3 o'clock on Thursday. I got there at 3:15 because Cincinnati traffic on the Norwood Lateral is Cincinnati traffic, even on a holiday. My mother met me at the door and hugged me the way she has been hugging me since I turned 17, which is with the lower half of her arms and none of the rest of her. She said, "You're late." Set the folding chair at the end. Behind her, the smell of burned sweet potatoes rolled out of the kitchen. My mother has not burned sweet potatoes since 1998. That was the first sign the room had lost its mind before I even walked into it. The dining room had been arranged for 12. My Aunt Bernadette and my Uncle Brian, my Aunt Maureen and my Uncle Kieran, Mrs. Fitzpatrick and her husband from parish council, my godmother Mrs. Sullivan, my parents, my brother, my sister, and me. There should have been 13 with Nana Fiona, but Nana Fiona had a bad day at Mercy Manor and had not been brought over. The chair at the end of the table was a metal folding chair. My chair, for as long as I have been alive, has been the wooden one next to my father. Vivian was in the wooden one now, in the Kelly green dress she wore to the fundraiser in June, her hair up in the same twist Bridget wears in every parish photograph. Cormac was leaning against the wall in the living room with a bottle of Miller Lite. When I walked past him, he handed me a coffee mug and said, "Careful with that, big sister. Doctor's orders." Or should I ask which doctor? The mug was cobalt blue. The coffee inside was black. I smiled the way I have learned to smile at people I don't trust. I said, "The one who tells me to drink water instead of coffee." "I'll pass, Cor." I set the mug on the kitchen counter without drinking from it. Cormac watched me do that. His face did not change. He was learning something about me, and I was learning something about him. Dinner started at 3:15 and lasted for about 20 minutes before it stopped being dinner. My mother stood up during the middle of it. She did not take her apron off first, which is how I knew she had scripted this for herself. She wanted the visual. She wanted to be the mother who had been in the kitchen for you and was still willing to stand up. She said, "Before we go any further, I need to say something. As a mother, as a Christian woman, and as the daughter of Fiona Halloran, who is dying in a nursing home and cannot defend the reputation of this house." Mrs. Fitzpatrick looked at me across the table and then very carefully looked down at her mashed potatoes. Vivian stood up. I watched her stand up. I watched her walk around the table with steps that were too even. 3 steps, 4 steps, 5, 6. I watched her pick up my plate. I watched her carry it into the kitchen. I watched her tip it, deliberately, into the Rubbermaid trash can behind the counter. The last thing to fall was a slice of white turkey. It made a small, dry sound when it hit a banana peel. She turned and looked at me and said, in a voice she had clearly practiced in a mirror, "A woman pregnant out of wedlock doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as this family. You're nothing but a disgrace." My mother looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Get out, we're done with your shame." My father stood up. He did not look at me. He walked to the front door and he opened it like he was a doorman at a hotel he did not want me staying at. My brother laughed under his breath. I heard it. He wanted me to hear it. Vivian sat back down. She picked up her fork. She looked at her plate and said, very quietly, "Mom, I don't understand why she has to." My mother looked at her. Vivian did not finish the sentence. She put her fork down. She did not eat again. I stood up. I did not take my coat. I did not take my grandmother's stainless steel casserole dish, which was still on the sideboard, empty because my sweet potatoes had gone in the trash with the rest of me. I looked at every single one of them. I said, "Understood." I walked past my father, who kept his eyes on the threshold. I stepped over the little runner rug in the entryway that my mother has had since 1994. I stepped out onto the porch. My father closed the door behind me. He did not slam it. He did not say my name. I stood on the porch of the house I grew up in for about 3 seconds. Then I walked across the wet grass to the yard next door and up the porch of the woman who had lived there since 1979. Estelle Kowalski opened her door before I got to it. She said, "I saw them open the door. Sit down. I already made you a plate." Estelle is 74 years old. Her husband Stanley died a long time ago. Her son Thaddeus, who everyone called Tad, died in the plant fire in 2011. He was a firefighter. He and Nolan went through the academy together, only Tad went to Station 7. His photograph is on Estelle's mantle next to a small crucifix. His fire helmet hangs on a peg by the back door. I sat at Estelle's kitchen table with a plate of turkey and mashed sweet potato in front of me on a chipped porcelain dish with a blue flower border. I ate 3 bites. I put the fork down. Estelle poured coffee I couldn't drink. Her old gray cat, Butterscotch, came in and sat on my feet. She said, "You don't have to finish, honey. The plate is yours whether you eat it or not." I said, "How did you know?" She said, "I saw you and Nolan at Findlay in September. You forgot to take the ring off. I put 2 and 2 together. Then last month your mother said his name at prayer group with a tone I didn't like." I said, "You never told me?" She said, "It wasn't mine to tell." She reached across the table and put her hand on the back of mine. Her hands were the hands of a woman who has poured coffee for other people's children for 50 years. There were small brown spots on the knuckles. Her wedding band was still on her ring finger. Stanley had been dead since 2007. She had never taken it off. She said, "I want to tell you something, because I think you need to hear it from somebody who buried a boy in that uniform. When my Thaddeus died, I had to decide whether to spend the rest of my life mad at the building he ran into, or grateful for the man he was when he ran. I picked grateful. It was harder. I do not regret it. Whatever your mother did to you tonight, honey, you are going to have to make the same choice about her, and I want you to know now that you do not have to make it tonight." I said, "I don't think I'm going to pick her." She said, "That is also allowed. There is no rule that says you have to. You can be grateful for your grandmother and not for your mother. You can be grateful for the daughter you are carrying and not for the house you grew up in. You are allowed to be a whole person out of pieces you chose." She said, "You call him. Tonight. Not tomorrow." I sat on her sofa at 10:04 p.m. Butterscotch stayed on my feet. I typed 3 sentences into my phone and sent them to my husband. "Don't worry, I'm okay. My parents just kicked me out." I did not add anything else. I put the phone face down on the sofa cushion. Estelle brought me a blanket. She kissed my forehead the way she used to kiss it when I was 6 and had scraped my knee in her driveway on my new bike. She said, "You sleep here tonight. Butterscotch will keep your feet warm." If you have ever been fed by a woman who wasn't your mother on the night your mother threw you out, Take 1 second right now and say her name in the comments. Not for me. For her. She earned that. Nolan was standing outside the Holiday Inn on a Columbus service road when he read my text at 10:08 p.m. I know this because his phone was in his hand and Declan told me later. He read the 3 sentences 3 times. He did not answer with words. He walked back into the lobby, grabbed his duffel bag off the luggage cart, and called Declan from his truck at 10:14. He said, "I need you at my house in 6 hours. Bring my witness copy of the license." He called his mother at 11:15 from somewhere south of the I-71 exit at Wilmington. Maeve did not sound surprised. She said, "I've been waiting for this call for 3 weeks, love, since Rowan told me what he heard at the parish." She said, "I'll be there before dawn. And I'll bring the ring." She opened the small wooden box on her dresser where she keeps the wedding band Patrick Fitzgerald put on her hand in June of 1987. The ring my father-in-law gave her. The ring she took off the morning she gave it to me and had not put back on since. The ring she had, apparently, sent to an engraver in Mount Lookout 3 weeks earlier to have a second inscription added inside the band. Nolan Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Halloran, December 2024. She had known this day was coming since October. She had been ready since October. Nolan pulled into our garage in Hyde Park at 22 minutes past midnight. He did not come to Estelle's. He did not want anyone in that north side block seeing his truck before he wanted them to. He showered. He slept for 3 hours on top of the comforter with his boots still by the door. At 5, Declan let himself in with the spare key we keep in the little iron lantern by the mailbox. He had a manila envelope with our marriage license and the notarized copy of the witness affidavit he had signed at the courthouse the day after Christmas. Maeve arrived at 5:15 in a coat I had never seen her wear outside of funerals. At 5:50, my husband, my mother-in-law, and my husband's best friend got into a gray Ford F-150 and drove north across the city toward the house I had been thrown out of the night before. At 6:15 in the morning, the doorbell rang at my parents' house. My father answered it. He was in a white undershirt and jeans, holding a mug of coffee. He looked at the 3 people on his porch. He did not recognize the woman in the coat. He recognized the uniform on the man in the middle. Every man in Cincinnati recognizes a Class A dress uniform of the Cincinnati Fire Department, especially the ones with a captain's bugles on the collar. My father did not say anything for 4 seconds. His hand shook enough for the coffee to move. Nolan said, "Mr. Halloran, I believe you know my wife." My mother came out of the kitchen with a dish towel in her hand. She had been up since 5 making apple bread, the smell of it drifting into the entryway, because that is what she does the day after a holiday when she is pretending nothing happened. She stopped in the doorway of the front hall. She saw the uniform. She saw the woman. She said, in a voice I had never heard her use on our own porch, "Mrs. Fitzgerald?" My mother-in-law said, "Mrs. Halloran, my son and I would like a word with you and your husband, please. Inside would be easier for you than the porch. That is a courtesy, not a requirement." Vivian came down the stairs in flannel pajama pants and a Bearcat sweatshirt. She stopped on the 3rd step and put her hand on the banister my father had refinished the summer before. She said, "Captain Fitzgerald?" Very quietly, not to Nolan, to the air in the hallway. Nolan turned his head toward the stairs. He said, "Miss Halloran." It was neither warm nor cold. It was the voice he uses in a command post. Cormac came out of the living room in yesterday's shirt. He said, "You have got to be kidding me." My mother-in-law opened her small wooden box. She did not take the ring out yet. She took out the manila envelope and handed it to my mother. She said, "The wedding ring I am holding was on my finger for 38 years. My son gave it to your daughter on December 27th at the Hamilton County Courthouse. This is the license. Lieutenant O'Rourke and I are the witnesses on it." My mother took the envelope. She unfolded the paper. She read a document that had the notary's red seal on it, dated December 27th, 2024, signed Nolan Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Halloran. Her hand did not shake. Her hand went still. My father did not look at the paper. He looked at his coffee. Nolan's phone rang. He looked at the screen. He answered it, listened for 4 seconds, and held the phone out to my mother. He said, "It's for you." She took it. She said, "Hello," in the voice she uses when she is answering the rectory line. I have heard the rest of that phone call because my mother-in-law reconstructed it for me later that afternoon. Judge Rowan Fitzgerald said, "Mrs. Halloran, I understand you introduced yourself to me at St. Aloysius as the mother of a suitable girl for my nephew. My nephew has been married to your other daughter since December. I trust you will extend to her the courtesy you extended to me." He hung up. He did not wait for her to answer. My mother put the phone down on the little half-moon console table in the hallway. She did not press end. The line stayed open for another 6 seconds against the polished wood, hissing very softly, before whichever end of it Judge Rowan was on finally dropped. Nobody moved in that time. My mother did not turn her head. My father did not lift his coffee. Cormac's mouth was open around a word I do not think he ever remembered to say. Vivian, on the third step, had both hands on the banister now. The dish towel my mother had been holding had slipped down her wrist and hung there like a small white flag she had not meant to raise. My mother put her right hand flat on the wall next to the console table. She held the wall. Estelle had walked me across the yard when she saw the truck stop next door. I came in through the front door behind my husband, wearing yesterday's clothes and one of Estelle's cardigans, and I stepped past my father into my mother's front hall. Nolan turned when he heard me. He did not hug me. He took my hand. Maeve came to stand next to me. She took the ring out of the box. She slid it onto my finger in front of my mother, in front of my father, in front of my brother and my sister. She said, "Now everyone in this house has seen it on your hand." That was the point. She kept her hand around mine for another second. Then Nolan said, "We are going. Elizabeth is staying with me and my mother tonight and every night after." He turned toward my father. He said, "Mr. Halloran, you do not owe me anything. You owe your daughter an accounting of last night. Whether you give her one is your business. She will not come asking." He turned toward my mother. He did not say her name. He said, "Mrs. Halloran, my uncle has your number. My mother has your parish. I will not have either of them again unless you make it necessary. Do not make it necessary." He turned toward Cormac. He said, "Officer Halloran." He did not add anything after that. He did not have to. Cormac closed his mouth. We walked out of my parents' front hallway. Nolan opened the door for me the way my father had opened it the night before, and the meaning was not the same at all. At 8, back in Mount Lookout, my mother-in-law scanned the license and emailed it to Father Ronan Donovan at St. Aloysius. She called him at 8:45. I don't know the full text of what she said. I know that at 9, Father Donovan called my mother into his office. I know that at 10, my mother came home and did not speak to my father for the rest of the day. I know that my mother did not go to prayer group the following Wednesday, or the Wednesday after that, or the one after that. I know that in the first week of December, firefighter Brendan Kelly took his F-150 off the Halloran Auto Body books after 12 years and moved his account to Muldoon's in Clifton. He did it the way a good man breaks up with a barber. He came into the shop. He shook my father's hand. He said, "Sean, just settling up. Thanks for the years." 2 other firefighters from Station 19 did the same thing the week after. My father called my mother at 11 in the morning of the 3rd day and said, in a voice I later heard reconstructed by an uncle, "Something's wrong. Nobody's saying anything, but they're all leaving." They kept leaving. Over the next 3 months, my father lost 40% of his customer book. He did not lose it to price. He did not lose it to service. He lost it because Cincinnati's first responder families are one family, and when Maeve Fitzgerald calls the parish at 8 in the morning after her son knocks on your door, the parish knows by Mass on Sunday, and by the Monday shift change, so does every firehouse and every district station in the west side of the city. There were no lawsuits, no arrests, no warrants, no headlines. Just a small notebook my father had kept since 1988, and 9 names crossed out in it in the space of a week. I did not know most of this in real time. I heard it in pieces, from an aunt who still called me, from Estelle who still lived next door and watched the driveway, from Vivian once she moved out, and from Declan, who had a friend at the parish who repeated to him the words parishioners used at coffee hour when they thought nobody with a badge or a hose was listening. The picture assembled itself slowly and steadily, like a hand of cards being turned over one at a time. What I noticed most was that nobody in my family called me, not to apologize, not to explain, not to check whether the baby I was carrying was all right. My mother sent voicemails. My father sent nothing. Cormac sent nothing. Only Vivian eventually reached out, and only because she had finally read enough of the group chats she had access to. On the Saturday morning after Thanksgiving, my mother went to Findlay Market. I heard about this from Estelle, who heard about it from her cousin Adelaide, who runs a spice stall in the North Hall. 3 women my mother knew from prayer group walked past her and nodded without stopping. The 4th woman turned her back to a wall of cheese. My mother stood for a long minute with her canvas bag empty on her arm. Then she went home. She did not buy anything. She did not call me. She called Vivian, who was standing in our kitchen in Hyde Park drinking coffee out of my husband's mug. Vivian let it go to voicemail. You are still with me, I hope. If you are here, subscribe. The next part is the part I still cannot say out loud without stopping. There is a reason my brother laughed under his breath at that table. There is a reason he came to my house on Halloween. You are going to want to know. On December 10th, Vivian called me from the parking lot of her dentist's office. She said, I need to see you. Not at Mom's. Anywhere else. Please, I said. Grader's on Hyde Park Square. Tomorrow at 3. She was there 10 minutes early with a black backpack. She ordered black raspberry chip in a paper cup and did not touch it. She had her hair down. She had not had her hair down at a table with me in maybe 3 years. She said, I've been going through Mom's phone when she's at the parish. Since Thanksgiving. She said, you need to see what Cormac sent Mom. She turned her phone around and slid it across the table. There were 6 photographs. They were photographs of my medical file. Not my current file. Not the pregnancy I was in the middle of. The old file. From November of 2024. The first one. The one I lost at 8 weeks and did not tell my family about. There was an ultrasound in it that was labeled with a date and a heartbeat rate, and there was a note from my OB that said the words, missed miscarriage. The photos had been taken on Halloween at 7:16 in the evening in the master bathroom of my townhouse in Hyde Park. My hand was steady. My hand has been steady since I was 22. I sat and I looked at those 6 photographs while my sister watched me not react. Under the photographs, there were 6 text messages between my brother and my mother. The first one was from November 11th, less than 2 weeks after Halloween. It said, guess who's been seeing Dr. Alistair Brennan for 8 months? 2 guesses. Neither wrong. My mother replied, you're sure? Cormac said, I've got the file. The next message was to a group of 2 people. Cormac and a firefighter I had known casually for years named Brendan Kelly. Cormac had written, you should know your captain's girlfriend has been with a married doctor at Good Sam for at least half a year. I've seen the paperwork. I looked at the timestamp. November 11th. 2 weeks and change before Thanksgiving. Vivian said, Mom told him to send it. She thought it would make Nolan leave you. I said, Cormac doesn't know Dr. Brennan. Vivian said, No. I said, Dr. Brennan is a friend of Nolan's. Dr. Brennan has been separated from his wife since June of 2024. Nolan already knew, so Brendan Kelly asked Nolan, and Nolan told him it was a lie, and Brendan never spread it. The rumor died before it walked. That's why nobody at Station 19 ever looked at me differently. Vivian said, Why did Mom want this? I said, Because Dad owes Cormac $68,000 in back tax money that Cormac fronted him from his savings 2 years ago. Because Mom promised Judge Rowan Fitzgerald that you were the right girl for his nephew. Because if Nolan left me and married you, the Hallorans move up into the Fitzgeralds, and the $68,000 turns into a family loan that nobody ever asks about again. Vivian put her hand over her mouth. She said, So I was the collateral. I said, You were the collateral. She looked at the melting cup of ice cream in front of her. She said, I'm not going back tonight. Can I stay with Aunt Deirdre? I said, Yes. She went home to pack 2 suitcases. My mother sat in the living room with the TV on and did not stop her. My father shut the door behind Vivian without saying anything. Vivian drove to Aunt Deirdre's house in Mount Adams. Deirdre is my father's younger sister. She and my father stopped speaking in 2017 when Deirdre told him what kind of woman he had married. Deirdre opened the door in a robe and did not ask why my sister was there. She said, Your father and I stopped speaking in 2017 because I told him what kind of woman he married. You can stay as long as you need. The guest bed is made. Vivian sat on the guest bed. She sent me one text. It said, I'm here. At 4:20 on the afternoon of the 11th, I was in my car in the Hyde Park Square parking lot. I called Declan. I said, Not for legal, for the department. Nolan should decide. Declan said, Copy. Chief will handle it. Come home. Chief Malone met Captain Hayes of District 3 at the Public Safety Awards dinner in the first week of January. It was a conversation. It lasted about 4 minutes. There is no report of it, and there is no paperwork of it. In the second week of January, Cormac was moved to permanent nights. His district commander framed it as personnel restructuring. Cormac took the transfer without a grievance because a police officer who files a grievance when the fire department is not filing charges against him for evidence tampering is a police officer who has no future in the west side of Cincinnati. He knew that. He took the shift. In February, Father Donovan announced from the pulpit at 11 o'clock Mass, without naming anyone, that the parish council had accepted the resignations of 2 long-serving members. It was a very short announcement. He did not look at my mother, who was in her usual pew on the aisle. He did not need to. The parish knew already. By the end of February, my father had lost 40% of his customer book. He listed the shop for sale on the first Monday of April. Vivian moved into my aunt's guest room permanently and stayed. She started coming to our townhouse on Saturday mornings. Nolan let her in the first time without a word about it. He put coffee in front of her. She sat on the couch and looked at the ultrasound photograph we had taped to the refrigerator. She said, I want to know her, if you'll let me. I said, You're her aunt. That's not going to change. But you don't get a free pass into my house because of it. You come when I invite you. She said, Okay. She did not push. She has not pushed since. That is one of the ways I know she meant it. By the middle of March, I was 37 weeks pregnant, and my back hurt in the specific way it hurts when a baby has decided her head belongs against your spine. My mother started calling me at 8 in the morning, and again at 3 in the afternoon, and again at 9 at night. She left voicemails. She did not text. I saved every voicemail. I did not listen to most of them. The one I listened to was the one she left on the 12th of March. It said, "Elizabeth, your grandmother is asking for you. She may not have another birthday. Don't punish her because you are punishing me." Nana Fiona's birthday was March 15th. She would be 89. My mother was planning a full family dinner at her house on Sunday afternoon, and everyone was expected. My mother had not called me about a family dinner in 4 months. I did not call her back. I called Mercy Manor. I asked the charge nurse if she could arrange a small breakfast in the family dining room on the second floor for Sunday at 8:30. She said yes. She said Fiona would love that. She said Fiona had asked about me on Wednesday. I did not tell my mother I was going. On Sunday morning, Nolan drove me to Mercy Manor. It was a cold, clear March day. Nana Fiona was in her wheelchair in a light blue cardigan. She had done her own hair, which she has been doing since 1948, and refuses to let the aides touch. I sat down next to her. Nolan sat on her other side. She took his hand first, which is how she has always greeted the men in her family. She said, "You'll do." We had French toast. Nana ate a whole piece, which the charge nurse told me later she had not done in 2 weeks. She looked at me. She said, "Your mother has been telling stories since she was 11. Don't let her tell yours." I said, "I won't." She looked down at my belly. She put her hand on it, over my sweater. The baby moved. Nana laughed once, a small dry sound. She said, "This one's going to be smart too." Good. She reached up and unpinned a small gold 4-leaf clover pin from her cardigan and handed it to me. She said, "This one is yours now. Wear it on the day she gets baptized." At 8 p.m. that Sunday, my mother called me. I did not answer. She sent a text. It said, "Your grandmother asked for you all night." My grandmother had asked for me at 8:30 in the morning, and I had been there. I moved my mother's text thread into a folder on my phone labeled Bridget. There were 61 unread messages in it. I did not open any of them. I put the phone face down on the arm of the couch. Nolan looked at me and did not ask. Fiona Estelle Fitzgerald was born on March 30th at 11:52 in the morning at Good Samaritan Hospital. She weighed 6 pounds and 12 ounces. Dr. Fiadba McCabe delivered her. Loretta Byrne, who had run the ICU while I was still in scrub 6 years ago and who had moved to labor and delivery 2 years back, was the one who put my daughter in my arms. Loretta said, "Halloran Cool Hands, you did the hardest shift of your life." I laughed once. I did not have any voice left for anything else. Nolan held her second. He was still in the shirt he had come to the hospital in at 4 in the morning. He looked down at her, at the small tuft of hair that was already going red like his mother's. He said, "We'll have a Podrick someday. Not this one, but someday." That was when I cried. It was the first time I cried in the whole of this story. A week later, we drove out to Mercy Manor. Nana Fiona was in bed. The charge nurse had told us she would probably not get up again. I brought Fiona in a carrier and laid her in Nana's arms myself. Nana held her for 4 minutes. She did not talk for the first 2. Her lips moved once and I leaned in and heard, "Fiona for me, Estelle for the woman next door." "You couldn't have chosen better, Lizzie." She brushed her thumb across my daughter's forehead. She said, "She's a Halloran. She is going to be all right." She looked at me and said, "You know that." I said, "I know." Nana Fiona died in her sleep on the 22nd of April. The charge nurse called me at 5 in the morning. She said Fiona had gone easy, which is the phrase she reserves for the residents she loved. She said Nana had been holding the little rosary my grandfather had given her in 1951. The funeral was at St. Aloysius on the 26th. Nolan drove me. Maeve came in the car behind us. Estelle came in her old Buick with her nephew driving. Aunt Deirdre came with Vivian. Declan and 3 men from Station 19 came in dress uniforms to pay respects. My father and mother came in separately. They sat in the last pew. They did not speak to me. They did not speak to each other either. My father cried into a folded handkerchief. My mother did not. I did not go to the burial. I went home. Nolan drove me. Fiona slept the whole way in the back in the car seat that had cost more than my first month of rent as a new nurse. Nolan put a hand on my knee at the light on Erie Avenue. He said, "You okay?" I said, "I am okay." That was the truth. On May 6th, a Wednesday, Nolan and I brought Fiona to the ICU at Good Samaritan. She was 5 weeks old. I wanted my colleagues to see her, and I wanted her to be in the building where I had held the elbow of a man in a soot-streaked turnout coat with a bottle of water in his hand almost 3 years earlier. Loretta was working. Half the day shift crowded around us in the little back office off the nurses' station. Somebody had cut a sheet cake, which is against about 11 different hospital policies. Nobody cared. At about 2:10, Estelle Kowalski walked in. She had taken the bus from Northside. She had a soft gray knitted bag on her arm. She had made Fiona a small blanket, the first thing she had knitted since Tad had died. The wool was pale gray with a border of yellow flowers. She stopped in the doorway of the ICU family room, which is the room off the hallway, where I had stood next to Nolan the night of the fire in August of 2023. She said, "You called me?" That's all I needed. I gave her my daughter. She held her the way a person holds a child she is not going to give back until she is ready. She looked down at her. She said, "Fiona Estelle Fitzgerald, your grandfather Patrick, and my Thaddeus." Oh, honey. Nolan put a hand on Estelle's shoulder. He did not say anything. I looked at my daughter in a woman's arms and I thought about the plate that had gone into the trash 6 months earlier, and the plate that had been waiting for me on Estelle's kitchen table at 6:30 the same evening. The word understood means something different to me now. It used to mean I would take what you gave me. Now it means I know exactly what I am worth. And so does she. If you have a boundary you are carrying this year, write one line of it in the comments. You do not have to explain it. You do not owe anyone an explanation for the plate you refuse to eat off of. You do not owe anyone an apology for the door you walked through of your own free will. I did not build the life I have because my family let me. I built it because I stopped waiting for them to. You can too. If a story like this belongs in your feed, subscribe. Not for me, for the person who is going to find it after you do. There is somebody out there right now sitting on their neighbor's couch with a paper plate they didn't ask for, wondering what kind of morning is going to come next. I would like them to know. The morning comes, and you get to open the door for yourself.